Hey folks, Yarn Love is back this season, starting with a new long sleeve tee. So if you live in a slightly warmer climate, or if it's just not cold enough yet for a sweatshirt, this is the way to go. Show your love of yarn and support the channel by picking up a long sleeve Yarn Love tee. Check the description below for a link to see the other color options and order yours today. I love these spooky hand warmers so much because they're fun for Halloween and they'll give you a chance to learn how to duplicate stitch on Tunisian crochet. That's right, these skulls aren't crocheted in, no color changes here. Just a really neat technique you can use for all sorts of projects. The step-by-step tutorial is coming up. So this pattern starts off at the band with your normal crochet hook. Now I have it written up in two different sizes, adult small and adult large, and I'll be making the smaller of the two. You'll want to check out the pattern for the details on the larger size because I'll be covering what I'm doing here in the small size. Okay, start off with 9 chains. And then find the second chain from the hook and single crochet there. Then continue with 1 single crochet in each remaining chain. At the end of the row, chain 1 and turn. When you flip your work and you look at the top side of that last row you just did, the first V right here next to your hook is the chain, so you don't want to make any stitches there. You'll want to look directly next to that. You'll see another V, which is the first stitch, and that's where you want to work. Now we're just working in the back loops only for this part of the pattern, so insert your hook in the back loop of that stitch and single crochet. And repeat. Super simple band pattern here. Make 1 single crochet in the back loop only of each remaining stitch. At the end of your row, you'll have 8 stitches. Again, if you're working on the small size, the large one is a little bit different. You'll chain 1 and turn again. That's all there is to the band. Repeat the last row 26 more times for a total of 28 band rows, again for the small size. And by the way, you can view the full pattern for free on my website. But if you'd rather have a PDF to print and take with you while you work, you'll need to become a B.Hooked insider for that. Now there's more to being an insider than just printable patterns too. As an insider, you'll also have access to our messaging system, so you can get pattern support directly from me if you need it. You'll be able to vote for upcoming patterns and tutorials. You'll get a new pattern every single month that's not available anywhere else. And our newest feature, ad-free tutorials. Now, if this sounds like something that'll really help you out, just check the link in the description to see all the details and how to sign up. After you finish the band repeat, it'll look something like this. It's nice and stretchy, which is exactly what we want for the band. From here, don't fasten off. Instead, we need to work a row of single crochet along the edge to sort of clean things up and give us a nice foundation to start working our Tunisian knit stitches. So chain 1 and make a single crochet in the side of that first row. Then I like to find the bump of the stitch that's in the next row over and single crochet there. and then I'll find the little hole and single crochet there too. Honestly, you can work in any part of the side of the row. As long as you're consistent, it'll turn out nicely. And ultimately, what you want to do is make sure you have one single crochet for every row of the band. So for the small size, that's a total of 28 stitches. Again, don't fasten off at the end of this row. Instead, pull up on the working loop and release your crochet hook. You're done with that for a little while, and replace it with your Tunisian hook. You'll want to flip your work so you can work the forward pass. And to do that, find the first stitch and insert your hook there, catching both loops. Then yarn over and pull up a loop and leave it there. Then keep going. Insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. Do this for every single stitch, gathering loops on your hook as you go. So in case Tunisian crochet is new to you, one thing that's really important to understand about it is that a Tunisian crochet row is actually made up of two separate parts. You have the forward pass, which is what we're doing now, gathering loops on the hook, and that's followed by a return pass where loops are worked off the hook. Go ahead and do a quick count to check and make sure you have the right number of stitches or the right number of loops on your needle. That's really going to be dependent on the diagram. You want to make sure you have the right number of stitches, so 28 for the smaller size. And we're ready to work the return pass. The good thing about the return pass is it's the same every single time. You'll always yarn over and pull through one loop first, then yarn over and pull through two loops, and continue to yarn over and pull through two loops until only one remains on your hook. When you complete a return pass, it sort of creates an open meshwork with two vertical bars, one in front of the other. Now, how you work into or around these bars determines the stitch that you're making. And for the Tunisian knit stitch, which mimics the stockinette stitch in knitting, is worked like this. Find the two vertical bars and stick your hook in between them. Then poke the hook through the next open space towards the back of the work. So you're sort of going in at an angle. Now what that does is it rotates the bars so they look like a V, the traditional stockinette stitch. Then keep going, making a Tunisian knit stitch for every stitch. So when you get to the end of the row, we have to treat it just a little bit different because the final stitch isn't really a vertical bar situation. It's actually a chain that's created, the chain one, when you yarn over and pull through one at the beginning of that return pass. That's what you're working into here. So you'll want to find the chain and insert the hook in two loops of that chain. So it'll end up being the side loop and the back bump of the chain. You want to make sure you catch both of those loops for the cleanest looking edge. So from there, you'll work the same return pass. Yarn over, pull through one, That'll be the chain that you work into on the next forward pass, and then yarn over and pull through 2 until you have only 1 loop left on your hook. And that's the repeat for the rest of the pattern. Work your forward pass with Tunisian knit stitches, then work the return pass just as before. You'll want to keep going until your work measures about 6 1/4 inches for the small size. When you're nearing that length, you'll want to make sure you stop at the end of a return pass, and that's where we'll pick up on the bind off. When you do that, your work will look something like this. Now for the bind off. Once again, make sure you've left off after completing a return pass so you have that sort of open framework for the bind off. You'll insert your hook in the first stitch the same way as before, just to do a regular Tunisian knit stitch. You'll yarn over and pull up a loop, and then instead of leaving that loop like you normally would, you'll pull that loop through the first one. Honestly, that's the only difference with the bind off. As you collect loops with your usual forward pass motion, you'll just pull the new loop through the last loop, and that'll bind it off as you keep going. When you have that completed, again, don't fasten off. Go ahead and pull up on the working loop and just leave it for now. To minimize the number of ends we need to weave in at the end, we're just going to leave this here. We'll pick it back up later to seam everything together. So now for the fun part. This technique you can use for all sorts of projects. So for each skull, you'll need a piece of contrast color, and for me it works best to have about 2 yards of that contrast color. You'll thread that on your needle, making sure that you're doubling it. You wouldn't necessarily do that for a duplicate stitch on knitting, but since the stitches for Tunisian crochet are thicker and they're a little bigger, this approach makes it look a lot neater than just using a single strand. First, you'll want to familiarize yourself with the V's in your hand warmer. Each V, or each stitch in this background, represents 1 square in the color diagram. Now you'll find the diagram with the written instructions, so make sure you have that handy as you begin. The first skull you'll probably have to follow it step by step, but it's a pretty easy pattern to get the hang of, and you can memorize it after working just 1 or maybe 2. Now for the best results, you'll want to start with the bottom left stitch in the skull. I see it's 11 stitches down from the top of the work, which is represented by the top of the diagram, and 3 stitches over from the edge of the diagram, also the edge of the hand warmer. So that's this stitch right here. Keep your eye on that stitch and come at it from the back, inserting your needle in the bottom point of that V. Then pull it through and just leave yourself a couple inches on the back. So again, here's the stitch that I'm covering with the duplicate stitch. It has a tendency to stretch out. That's totally normal. You just kind of have to keep an eye on it. And what you'll want to do is find the stitch or the V above that and insert your needle through both legs of the V, keeping the needle on the right side of the work. Then insert the needle through the bottom point to finish it off. So follow the diagram to find the next stitch you need to cover with the duplicate stitch, and try as best you can to match the the tension of the stitches when you pull the yarn here, so it looks like it's more a part of the work and not just something that you've embroidered or added after the fact. So as you follow the diagram, you'll continue working from one side to the next, jumping upward and working back in the opposite direction. So you're always keeping this side to side, bottom to top approach to how you're working the duplicate stitches as you complete the skull. Once again, each black square in the color diagram represents one duplicate stitch in your contrast color. You might be using completely different colors than this, and that's okay. Alternatively, each white square in the diagram represents one stitch in the Tunisian knit stitch background. Now, it might take a few tries to get this to look as neat as possible, but I have a few tips to making your duplicate stitches and your skeleton as neat as possible. So the first thing is to start from the bottom of the diagram and work upwards. I tried doing it the opposite way and it really is just very difficult, and the duplicate stitches don't look very neat, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. The next thing is to try not to let the strands twist. Since we've got it doubled here, that's what they're going to do. As you work the stitch, they're going to twist. So just make sure you untwist it every now and then as you work, because when the strands are twisted, it becomes more condensed and skinnier, and then you can sort of see the background through that duplicate stitch. Another tip is to pull a little more tight than to leave it loose. Do the best you can to match the tension within the background in the Tunisian knit stitches, but err on the side of a little bit tighter than a little more loose, because that'll make the neatest results. The last tip I have is to really try to make sure you go through that bottom point in the same spot when you're working that last motion of the duplicate stitch, because it'll look more like a stitch that's in place rather than something that's embroidered on top. The good news, if you get finished with your first skeleton and it looks really awful, all you have to do is sort of work it back out. Remove your needle, pull it all back through. You can even trim it off very carefully so you don't trim the work below it, and start over until you're happy with the results. But I don't want to scare you away. It's actually really incredibly easy. It just takes a little bit of patience to get it right. When you finish your first skeleton, what you'll do is trim the leftover yarn and just tie it in a knot on the back. Now you can weave them in if you want, but these will be on the inside of the hand warmer and you won't see them. So I personally am not going to go through the extra work to weave it in, but it's completely up to you. Now, another tip is if you see little bits of the background color poking through, it's very obvious with very high contrasting colors, like you see here. Try using the needle to loosen up on the duplicate stitch to sort of cover it up. Another thing you might notice is sometimes the eyes will get distorted, kind of squished, surrounded by the thick duplicate stitches. When that happens, stick your needle under both loops of the V, kind of pull up on it a little bit while running it up and down. That'll make that stitch a little bit bigger and match the tension a little bit better, and the eyes won't get lost in the duplicate stitches. From here, go ahead and use the diagram to guide your placement for the remaining 3 skulls. Now don't worry if your work is curling like crazy, that's totally normal for Tunisian crochet. We'll fix that with the seam. Okay, pick up on the working loop with your regular crochet hook and fold the hand warmer in half. Find the first stitch on the opposite side and slip stitch there to join the 2 ends together. Then slip stitch in the next stitch, catching both layers. And then repeat that 8 more times, again for the small size. From here, it's a good idea to do a quick check to make sure it reaches your thumb. And now to make the opening, you'll just slip stitch in one of the layers. Now I'm making 6 slip stitches here for my thumb opening because I have pretty small hands, but you can make adjustments for the best fit, and I recommend you do that. When the thumb size is the size you need, line up the stitches and continue slip stitching in both layers on this Tunisian knit stitch portion of our hand warmer. When you reach the band, continue with 1 slip stitch in each stitch of both layers. So ultimately you'll be working in the last row stitches and in your foundation chain. Then go ahead and fasten off and weave in the ends. That's all for now, friend. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this quick Halloween project and you use the duplicate stitch in other projects in the future. If you haven't subscribed yet and you enjoy this sort of thing, please consider doing so. I make all sorts of crochet and knitting projects, and I would love to walk you through another project in the future. I also want to say a big thanks to my B.Hooked insiders. Their support is absolutely amazing, and there's just no way I could keep doing what I'm doing without them. Our latest insider is Michelle. Welcome, Michelle. I'm so thrilled to have you in the community, and I appreciate your support so much. Now, if you would like to become an insider, I'll have a link in the description below for you to check out. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.